those who doesn't know me, my name is Helle. I'm from Copenhagen, Vineyard, and I have been pastoring there for the last 9.5 years. I'm here with my family, and Jørn, who sits here, and we have been looking very much forward to look into Paul's letter to the Philippians. These 5 mornings, all 5 mornings will be about the Philippians, and today I will dig into chapter 1. Tomorrow, Jørn will dig into chapter 2, and so forth. And the theme is, as you can see, the joyful community pressing on towards the prize. And the picture is of Jørn when he was younger, running. You really went good exercise there. But this letter is called the Letter of Joy. I really love it. It's very exciting, and it is about joy. And it is, in fact, the illustration of an Old Testament verse from Nehemiah. Do not be anxious, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. So that is what this letter is all about. That we should not be anxious, because the joy of the Lord is our strength. And I hope that as we look into this picture, letter, that we will really experience that. The joy of the Lord, how it can be our strength. And Paul speaks actually of joy in these 4 chapters, and I will recommend that you read it, this letter, but he speaks about joy not less than 19 times. And he shows us through words, but also through deeds, what he is doing, that we can embrace life, and we can embrace the world that we are living in. We can embrace our opportunities. We can embrace true joy by embracing God's love. And joy is the keynote from beginning to end. His message is that joy is, believe it or not, joy is available to anybody. Also, those of us who are sitting here, anybody, no matter what we have experienced in life, no matter who have hurt us, no matter our disappointments, no matter our hurt, for all of us, it's possible to have joy if we believe in Jesus and no matter the circumstances. So, therefore, today, this morning, I've chosen that I've called the teaching The Quest for Joy, because you know what? I believe that all of us, all human beings, it's a part of being human being, we are on a passionate quest for joy. Isn't it true? I think you are on a passionate quest for joy in your life. And then I was reminded of an incident quite a lot of years ago. I was at a restaurant with my husband, Carsten, and we were sitting in these kind of restaurants or cafes with really small tables that were really sitting close together, and beside us there was some other guests. There was 2 guys, and obviously they were a couple actually, and then a woman. And the woman was complaining so much. She was just going on about how stupid people were, how brainless they were, this was wrong, that was wrong, the whole world was against her. She was just going on and on and on. And Carsten, my husband, it was just very obvious for me, he was also in another world. He was thinking of something totally, else. He was not concentrating on me. I don't know if you have tried that, those of you who has a boyfriend or a husband, that you can just feel he's not here with me. It's really annoying. And that was an example of that. He's wonderful, but exactly that incident, he was not there with me. So I was sitting there having a great time at that restaurant. Then when we were sitting there enjoying ourselves, all of us, she was complaining, he was in another world, I was annoyed. out of the blue, suddenly, Carsten stood up and he turned to them and said, you know what? Actually, I am a Christian, and I really, really believe that God wants to speak to you through me. Yeah. And interesting. And then he took up his Bible, and then he read, "Rejoice in the Lord always," he read to the complaining woman. Again I say, rejoice, let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. And so on. You probably have read it. And I thought, how will they receive that? Because she was the most negative woman that that I had met for a long time. But you know what? They were so excited. They were so happy and surprised. And she said, that's so amazing, sitting here in this restaurant and receiving such a wonderful greeting. And suddenly all her complaints stopped. And she started talking with her friends not about other people, how stupid and ugly and brainless and awful they were, and how many people have disappointed her, and how this and that boyfriend had been a fool. Not about all that, but about this greeting from my husband, about joy. And I was very surprised, and the whole atmosphere, of course, in that restaurant just totally changed. And Carsten came back to me, and we could actually talk for the rest of the dinner. Wonderful. But the question remained. The big question remained, because this was actually just words that were interesting, but the question remained, what were the next steps for these 3 new friends? Now what? How should they implement this joy in their life? Where do we, those of us who sit here, where do we actually find a platform in life where our life continuously and steadily are marked by joy? Have you ever thought about that? Because that's a really good question, because we are longing for joy in our lives. But where is the platform? I'm sorry, I'm spitting. It is a challenge to speak English. I hope that you understand what I'm saying, trying to communicate. But many of us, we allow joy to have a life of its own in our lives. We wake up in the morning, many of us, and then we think to ourselves, am I happy today? Am I in a good mood today? Do I feel joy today? And then we are actually passive victims of the mood that we are in that specific morning. We are victims of our circumstances, our emotions. But when we read about Paul in Acts, as we will do today, and in Philippians, we discover that that is not how Paul was waking up in the morning at all. He was experiencing joy and happiness always. And he was able to rejoice always. And before we dive into how that is possible, because that's a truth from the Bible that can really change our life and that is so powerful. And I'm still in my life trying to receive it and eat it and get it into my everyday life with God. But before we dive into this very important thing, if one thing that we can get from this camp, this would be a really good one, to receive this joy and experience it and getting it into our life. But before we do that, I will introduce you to an action-packed story, the story of Paul, because he lived an action life. he was really experiencing so many crazy things. And it gives us, when we look at his story, it gives us the context in which we can understand the message in this letter. So that's why I want to use half of this teaching, the next, should I say how many minutes? Would you like that? I like that myself. But the next around 20 minutes, we will look at this action story of Paul, and then the last 20 minutes, we will dig into 2 key verses today, only 2 key verses, and I promise the next mornings we will look into the Philippians much more, but today only 2 verses in chapter 1 that provides answers, real answers that you can live on and that you can believe in, to how our heart's deepest longing for joy can be completely met. Does it sound okay? Mm-hmm. So now we will look into the life of Paul and the context in which this amazing letter is written. So in Acts 16, Apostlenes Gerninger, Acts 16, we read about the touching story behind Paul's friendship with this the recipients of the letter, the church in Philippi. Is it called that? Nobody knows, but you know what I mean. So anyway, we call it Philippi. And I must say, it is a mystery to me why nobody in Hollywood have made a movie out of this story. Because, 300 and whatever they are called, all these movies about ancient times, go home, because this can just overgo it all. But Paul is on his second missionary trip. Paul had several missionary trips around the Mediterranean, but Paul was on the second one around Asia Minor. And can you see the map? Maybe. You can see Italy and Greece, yeah. But it's a yellow line for those of you with young eyes. And he comes to the city of Troas. And many doors had just closed for him on his journey in Turkey. Nothing worked out. He was just asking God, what should I do? Because nothing is working out. One door is closing after the other. And one day, he sees a vision of a man, and I think I have a picture. I don't know if it exactly looked like that, but somebody have tried to paint a picture of it. But he sees a vision of a man calling him and saying, come over to us in Macedonia, because we need your help. Come over and help us in Macedonia. And somehow it reminds me so much of the Swedes, always so needy, asking us from Copenhagen, come over and help us, help us. And yeah, well, what Paul did was the same as we are always doing. He said, okay, I will come and help you. And then a few days later, as he set foot on European soil, I don't think that anybody, including Paul himself, actually knew what historical influence that trip would have. Actually, because he answered and he went over to Europe, because of this call and this vision, a spiritual tsunami started. And we Europeans, we are still experiencing the waves from that tsunami. I believe that this camp is actually still a wave after that tsunami, when Paul, he traveled on that vision to Europe. And Philippi was a rich Roman colony, and that means that it's a region where lots of Roman citizens lived. And however, we read in Acts, and you can check it, there was a few Jews also in Philippi, and it was only women, and they met down by the river to pray. In Jewish culture and Jewish tradition, you have to have 10 or 12 men to actually establish a synagogue, so they didn't have a synagogue, but they met down by the river to pray. And one of these Jewish women was Lydia. I also have a picture of her. It's a beautiful woman there, and she was Jewish, and she met with her girlfriends in a house group down there, and she was really, really rich. She dyed clothes purple, as you can see, and she was rich because it was a really expensive color, this purple. It's taken from a snail. I've really researched. I hope you're interested, but it is from this snail. And you know what? 1 gram costs 18,000 Danish kroner. So, and that's about 100,000 Swedish kroner. And she was really rich. And then Paul and Silas begin talking with her and her girlfriends and telling her about Jesus, telling them about Jesus, that Jesus is actually the Messiah that they are waiting for, that they are praying for, that he would come. And they are sharing, you know what? What you don't know is that God has not turned his back on us. Isn't it wonderful? God has not turned his back on us. On the contrary, he actually loves us so much that he actually came to this earth and died on a cross so that we can live together with him in peace. And we can find joy in this relationship. He said, Paul and Silas said to these women, Christianity, the true relationship to God, it's not a demanding religion, but it's a joyful friendship with God himself. And I think that we should receive that message today as well, because I believe, at least I experience that, I forget it, that it's the truth, that Christianity is not a demanding religion, but a joyful friendship with God himself. And this was then and is now the message that can change our lives completely. And if you are here and you have not received this truth, I will so much encourage you to do it today, because it will really change your life. It will give you a new life. And Lydia, she received it, and actually she was baptized immediately. Her whole house was baptized, and she became the first European Christian at all. And Paul and Silas was invited to stay with her in her house and eat her fancy food. And it became the beautiful start of this church plant in Philippi. This is the intro to the movie. Happy, everybody's happy, everybody is enjoying themselves. But then, now the action comes in, because their stay turned out to become something more dramatic. One day, when they were on their way down to the river, Paul and Silas, they wanted to, of course, share the story about Jesus to many more people. A girl follows them, and she's not a normal girl. She yells, she screams, she says weird things, and at one point, Paul has enough, and he turns around to her, and then he drives out a demon of her. And then she stops screaming and all that. But what he does not know, I don't know if he knew it, anyway, some guys owned this girl, and they earned a lot of money on her because she could actually predict people's future, because she had this demon. Without this demon, she couldn't predict anybody's future. So the guys was not able to earn money on her. And that, of course, just like today, created a lot of frustration, a lot of anger. A loss of income always creates a lot of frustration. And it did for these guys. So they turned totally mad, and they dragged Paul and Silas up on the main square of the city, and they were whipped, and they were put into the dungeon, and their feet was chained to the block. So the happiness suddenly was over. From sitting in Lydia's house, eating her nice food, a few hours later, they were in the dungeon with their feet in the block, and I can imagine it was smelling in there, it was damp, it was dark. And the amazing thing is that Paul and Silas, they were not angry, and they were also not upset because they were treated unjustly. I think I would have been a little bit upset. Hey, I'm just trying to do a good thing. And why am I sitting here in a dungeon then? But they were not. They were actually singing worship songs for the rest of the prisoners. And then suddenly, an earthquake happens. And it was not this kind of earthquakes where, total devastation, houses fall on top of people, everybody screams, everybody cries. We see it in the news always. It was not that kind of earthquake. It was an earthquake that made the chains break and the doors to the dungeon open. Only specific things. Nobody got a rock on their head. Only those few things. Weird earthquake. And the jailer, he was totally as upset and afraid because he, of course, thought, the prisoners that I am going to take care of, they are, of course, away. They are, of course, escaped. They have, of course, escaped. And he wants to kill himself with a sword because he was finished, because the prisoners was gone. But Paul, from inside this dark dungeon, he cries out to the jailer, don't do it, don't kill yourself, because we are all here, because Paul stayed in the dungeon and he had convinced all the people that was in there to stay. Maybe he said, if you run away, I will sing even louder. But they were all there. And then the jailer, he was totally overwhelmed. He said, who are you guys? What's going on here? I don't understand one thing. I've never experienced anything like this. A worship session in my jail, and then an earthquake, and then prisoners who don't want to run. What's going on here? And again, Paul has an opportunity to share the gospel, and he tells him about God, and he tells him that, Christianity, it's not a demanding religion, but a joyful friendship with God himself. Would you like to believe in this God? Would you like this friendship? And he says, yes, of course, I want to have this friendship. I want to become a believer. Who wouldn't say yes to this wonderful opportunity? And he is baptized that same night, and his whole house is baptized that same night. And are you excited? Yeah. And then the next day, the authority says to Paul and Silas, please run away. You are making so much mess in this city. We can't take it anymore. No more people who are, becoming believers in these dramatic ways. So please run away. Go, go, go. And then they continue their church planting venture to Thessalonica. And this is the beginning of the church in Philippi. That's an exciting church planting start, I think. There's drama, there's great excitement, and even though Paul had only been in Philippi only a few days actually, maybe 5 days, something like that, God had already planted a strong little church, and it was healthy, and it grew, and out of all the churches that Paul planted, this was especially emerging as very loyal to him, very supportive. They had a unique, warm friendship. They sent him greetings, they sent him money, they were encouraging him, and it's actually because of money, they sent him money, that he is writing this letter, the letter to the Philippians, to say thank you to them. So this is giving us a good context, a good perspective on this letter. Just a final thing. On the third and final missionary journey, that is the purple line for those of you who can see it, Paul visits Philippi again. And in that visit, he is writing the letter to the second letter to the Corinthians. But anyway, this journey also ends up in Jerusalem. Can you see that? Purple line goes to Jerusalem. And there's one more really big drama. Paul is in Jerusalem at the temple, and the Jews are so upset. They want to kill him, and the Roman soldiers have to carry Paul over the heads of all the people that are yelling and that are screaming and that want to fight. They have to carry him over their heads out of the temple, and they realize the Jews, they just want to finish this guy, but he's a Roman citizen, so they in the middle of the night they take him out of Jerusalem, and they don't drive him to the coast, but they somehow get him to the coast, Caesarea by the sea, and he sits there in a prison there for 2 years. And just like Jesus, when he was in a trial, nobody knew what to do with this man of God. What can we do with him? Can we kill him? No. Can we set him free? No. What to do with him? And after 2 years, Paul just gets enough. He wants to move on. So he says that he wants to I just have to find the English word. Appeal his case to the Roman emperor. And then he's sent to Rome. You can see the red line going to Rome. It is on this crazy trip, maybe you have heard that story, that the boat gets into a storm. Everybody thinks, now we are finished, now all of us will be killed. But the ship strands on Malta, and Paul gets into the coast, and then they have a fire, and a poisonous snake is biting Paul. And everybody thinks, now this guy is finished. Now it must be the end. But Paul just shakes the snake off in the fire and moves on. And everybody thinks, he must be a god then. And on and on with these dramatic details. But finally, Paul arrives in Rome, and he is imprisoned there, and he waits to stand trial before, and now there's one more picture, and I love it, before Caesar himself. Yeah, I think the guy, it's good that he didn't actually see this picture himself, because he was a psychopath. He was the infamous Nero, and he is famous because he actually not only killed his own mom, he killed several wives, and also he played the lyra. I also have a picture of that. He played the lyra while 70% of Rome went up in smoke. and the rumor is that he actually himself started that fire, because he just wanted to see, I wonder what Rome would look like if it burned, playing the lyra. So he was crazy. And Paul was waiting to meet this Nero for him to judge Paul. So he was sitting there in a prison waiting to meet this guy. And here ends the story of Paul in Acts, what we read about Paul in Acts, and it ends by saying, he proclaimed the kingdom of God and taught about the Lord Jesus Christ with all boldness and without hindrance. And it is at this time, can you imagine, after all this drama, all these incidents, all these episodes, that Paul is sitting in prison in Rome. It is at this time that he's writing this letter of joy to the Philippians. So it's not theory. He is actually writing this out of what he has experienced. And Rembrandt has, and many other people have tried to illustrate Paul sitting in a prison after a life that is characterized by these things, writing this letter of joy. And after hearing this story, our question must be one, and that is, how is it possible? How on earth is it possible to be happy, for Paul to be happy? How is it possible? It's a mystery. And it is possible for him to be happy, to have joy. We can read that. But then the next question must be, how can we get a piece of that cake? How can I get a piece of that cake of joy? And, all people are driven by the longing for happiness and joy, as I said before. And I'm sure you do it too. But many of us, we have a chronic feeling, I think, that our life is under-optimized. It could have been better, but it's not optimized. It's under-optimized right now. We say to ourselves, I don't feel joy right now, but when my project is handed in, or when this week is over, or when I retire, or when I get home from this camp, or when I go on vacation, then I will experience some happiness. Then I will probably find joy. And because we firmly believe this, and I actually think that this is almost a religion in our culture, that we believe that just around the corner we will find joy. We just have to fix a few things, then we find joy. In the nearest future, I have just noticed that it is dragging us around by the nose, this illusion that just around the corner we will be happy. Just have to have a boyfriend, just have to have a little bit more salary, I just have to have a holiday, I just have to have one more friend, or lose some weight. Then I will have the life that I'm dreaming of. We believe in this, but it's an illusion. And just an illustration, as some of you might know, some of you know for sure, because you're from Copenhagen, but in Copenhagen Vineyard we try to reach out for women in prostitution. We have several projects doing that. We are involved in a shelter, but we are also visiting women in brothels, and we are also meeting them on the streets. And a few months ago we actually, together with a few other churches, started a night cafe for foreign women in prostitution. And when you are in that environment, prostitution environment, you really get to see and observe what a tremendous force the quest for joy has. It's a tremendous force the quest for joy has. The women that we meet in the brothels or on the streets, they are pursuing joy or pursuing happiness in the customers. Many of the foreign women, they believe that if I just find one guy that is a real man and that will not just use me, but actually love me, then I will find joy. If I just earn a little bit more money, then I will find joy. And they also pursue happiness by trying to earn more money. I have talked to so many women who says to me, just one more fix. I just have to earn money for one more fix. Then I will stop, and then I will have a happy life. Or I just have to stand here one more night. I just have to be in this brothel one more month. And they really truly believe that this is reality. Just one more, just a week more. Then I will find joy. And the pimps, they pursue joy by striving for greater power or bigger territory. In Copenhagen, it's divided into territories, or more money. The men, the customers, they pursue joy in the women, of course, sexual satisfaction and the illusion of power over another person. It's a small fix of joy. And this is how the giant machinery of millions and millions and millions of kroner are running around, in that all are desperately pursuing real joy. Just a taste of happiness. And our message is, of course, to all the people involved in this. It's not a community at all, but in this business, it's a lie. You will not find joy here. Not real joy at all. It's an illusion. Joy is not found in the next fix, or in the next customer, or in the next girl. No, it's an illusion. Stop it. Because joy is found in a completely other place. And we are all in the same boat. We want to be happy. You and I, we just want to be happy. All human beings want to be happy. We are stubborn. We want to be happy. The problem is that happiness is so often slipping through our fingers. And so many of us are sometimes losing hope. We are tempted to give up on the quest for joy, on the quest for real joy. We are tempted to take something else in than the real joy. And I believe that so many people in our countries, we have chosen just a superficial life. And I believe that many of your friends and your neighbors or your colleagues, they know that they are missing something really essential. And this lack of real joy are eating their soul. But what to do about it? How to change it? What's the platform to change this, to really find joy? And Paul really experienced tough sides of life. He experienced violence. He experienced injustice, disease, failure, threats. The key answer to how it is possible that Paul is happy is to be found in these two verses. And now let's really listen to these words from Paul, because there's so much truth in it. Verse 20 and 21. I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage, so that now and always, and then he does not say, I will find, popularity, praise, money, power, whatever. No, that now and always Christ will be exalted in my body. That's what he's aiming for. Whether by life or by death, for me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. Let me explain what I think that he means by this. Many of us, we believe that for some reason, I don't know how we have got to believe it, but but to be a Christian, a really good Christian, you have to see God's will in contrast to pursuing your own happiness, what would be pleasurable for yourself, what you would like. But what really separates Paul from ordinary, what we could call hedonism, is not that Paul's approach to life is self-denying or duty-driven. The thing that separates him from hedonism is that he is aiming for a much greater and purer joy. It's not that joy somehow is not a holy thing to strive for, but what he is showing us is that he is aiming for a much purer and greater joy. He has realized, and in this entire joyful attitude that cannot be taken away from him, is based upon that worshiping God is the only way to unchanging and eternal joy or happiness. He found that joy is found in a totally other place than I thought. Paul never talks about denying or suppressing our passionate yearning for joy. The problem lies not within our desire to feel joy or to be happy. The problem is that we settle with a lot less than is offered or given to us by God. And you can consider this. Are you settling for a lot less than what God is actually offering you, joy-wise? What Paul is demonstrating for us is that true happiness or joy is not found in money. It's not found in power or sex or popularity or all these things that is from this earth, but in God's love and grace. The secret to why Paul can just sit there after all these challenges, and he can sit there in a jail waiting for Nero and be happy and write about joy. The secret is that he has chosen to find his pleasure in the origin and the source of joy and happiness, and that is God himself. That's why he can say, for me to live, or for me to be happy, or for me to feel joy, is Christ. Very easy answer, very, very simple. But that's the key, that's the truth, that's the source. John Piper, maybe you know him, he's a famous theologian, he says it like this: God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him. God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him. Paul's greatest passion, and we can again consider what is my greatest passion, but Paul's greatest passion is that Jesus may be glorified in his life. That's the highest priority, that Jesus may be glorified. Paul is a happy man. He's a happy guy when Jesus is exalted. What matters is not what he loses, but whether or not God is honored. Christ is just more precious, more valuable to him than all the things that this life can offer him. And in Philippians 3, and I will get back to that later in the week, he says it like this: indeed, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For his sake I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish in order that I may gain Christ. I have so much to learn from Paul. He really shows the way for us, because we are passionately striving to find joy, and he found it, and he can show us the way. He realized that happiness and joy does not appear around the corner. It's a lie, it's an illusion. Don't believe in it. Don't believe in it. That you just have to fix a few things and then you will find it. It's a lie. It will drive you around by the nose like those women that I told you about. It comes from honoring God, true joy. Paul points out that God himself is the source of our greatest happiness, our determination. The next one. Our right element is not to cling to life because of fear of death or wishing death because of our fear of life, but to live as intensely as possible in this dynamic, this interaction. God is most glorified in me when I am most satisfied or I am most joyful in him. The more he becomes exalted in your life, the more you taste of the full, real, genuine, everlasting joy that you are created for. And Jesus, he told a story about a man who found a pearl in the field, and for joy of this treasure, he went and sold everything to get this pearl. And actually, if you are struggling with your faith, if you're struggling to find joy in the gospel, to find your joy in the gospel, to have the gospel as your source for joy, you are actually fighting to hold on to this pearl, that it will be your pearl. The gospel will be your pearl. And I would like to end this session by praying for those of us who are striving to hold on to this pearl, that it will really, that the gospel will really be your treasure. Because that's what it's all about. What is our treasure? If the gospel is our treasure, we can find the joy that Paul experienced. So could we just stand up and I will pray. And if you are longing to experience this joy, this deep joy, not superficial, but really deep joy that you are meant for, and you want to find it in the gospel, in this pearl, then and that it sometimes is a struggle for you to seek your joy in God and not all the other things that are tempting to seek your joy in. Now it got a little bit complicated. You know what I mean. If you would like to just taste more of this real joy from God, could you just please raise your hand, and then somebody will put his hand on, or you can just put your hand on each other